I'm going to tell you something I was embarrassed to admit for a long time. At 103 years old, I was one of those people who thought modern science had it all figured out. That if a doctor prescribed you something, it was the absolute truth. That a grandma with her herbal remedies was just quaint and nothing more. That everything old-fashioned was just plain ignorance. I was wrong, dead wrong, and it took me way too many years to realize it. Oh, and before I forget, because at my age the memory isn't what it used to be, if anything I share here helps you out, please subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost a dime, and it helps me keep sharing these stories. As long as I can talk, I have things to say. And at 103, wouldn't you know it, it turns out I have more to say than ever. Well, listen here. It was winter. One of those Chicago winters that chill you to the bone, even if it's not snowing. I must have been in my 70s, which already seemed incredibly old to me back then. My friend Dorothy, Dot we called her, a woman from the South Side with more common sense than all the doctors I'd ever met put together, looked me in the eye one day and said, "Maggie, do you know what your mother used to eat?" I stopped dead in my tracks, because my mother never went to a doctor, not once in her whole life, and she lived to be 92 with a body that actually worked. She'd get up at 6 in the morning, bake bread, tend to the garden, and go to bed without a single complaint. Meanwhile, there I was with my pills, my blood tests, and my checkups, always tired and always aching somewhere. "What did your mother eat?" Dot asked me again. And then I started to remember. And what I remembered changed everything for me. My mother never skimped on olive oil. She put it on everything, on salads, on bread, in her stews. A good, generous pour without holding back. "Good oil doesn't make you fat," she'd say. "It greases the wheels of the body." And I laughed at her for years. Wow, what great science my mother had. Well, it turns out that science, real laboratory science, has been studying extra virgin olive oil for decades and says the exact same thing. It promotes overall wellness. It protects the heart. It has compounds that do wonders for the body, supporting your vitality without tearing up your stomach. The Bible mentions it over 140 times. Kings were anointed with it. The Good Samaritan poured oil on the wounds of that man on the road. My mother poured it on everything, and she was right. Honey was never missing from her kitchen either. Real honey, the kind that hasn't seen a commercial kitchen or a factory, the kind that actually tastes like something. When I was a little girl and got a sore throat, she didn't run off to the pharmacy. She'd give me a spoonful of honey and send me to bed. They already said it in the Song of Solomon, "Honey and milk are under your tongue." And it turns out that raw, unheated honey has extraordinary protective properties. They value it highly, believe it or not, for skin care. They pulled a 3,000-year-old jar of honey out of the Egyptian tombs, and it was still edible. It doesn't spoil. It doesn't expire. I just can't wrap my head around that without being amazed. And figs. Oh, the figs. And when King Hezekiah was having a really hard time with a terrible boil, the prophet Isaiah didn't just pray and leave it at that. He ordered a poultice of figs to be applied to it, and Hezekiah recovered. Well, that thing that sounds like an old wives' tale has a name in science, phycin, an enzyme that promotes cell renewal and helps the skin heal. Figs are also an extraordinary source of fiber, magnesium, and potassium. My mother ate them dried all winter long. For the bowels, she'd say. For the record, she was right. Anyway, I started going down the rabbit hole, and the deeper I dug, the more I found. Dates. Soldiers and pilgrims used to carry them in their knapsacks because they held up on the journey and gave them the strength to push through the miles when needed. Natural sugar with fiber, with minerals, with everything the body needs. And modern studies show that pregnant women who eat them in their last month have an easier labor. Just so you know, pomegranates. Now that really left me speechless. In Solomon's temple, there were 200 pomegranates carved into the pillars. It wasn't just decoration. It was a message. Because pomegranates have compounds that barely exist in any other food, which the gut converts into something researchers have been studying for years for its effects against cellular damage and aging. Pomegranate juice supports circulation, looks after your arteries, and has more antioxidants than red wine or green tea. And the peel, which everybody throws away, is the most concentrated part of all. My mother used to dry it and steep it in hot water whenever one of us had an upset stomach. Good heavens! Of course she knew. Lentils? Well, look at that, the food of prophets and poor folks alike. Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of red lentil stew. That always seemed like an exaggeration, right? But the thing is, when you've been working under the sun for hours, lentils give you exactly what your body craves: protein, iron, folate, and slow-burning energy that doesn't just fade away in half an hour. The communities that eat the most legumes in the world are the ones that live the longest. That's nothing to sneeze at. Barley, the bread of humble folks. When Jesus multiplied the loaves to feed 5,000 people, they were barley loaves, and barley has more beta-glucan than any other grain, a soluble fiber so well documented that the FDA actually lets them put on the label that it helps manage cholesterol. It balances blood sugar, and it feeds the good bacteria in your gut. It was the poor man's grain, and it turns out it was the healthiest one of all. Mind you, the wheat in the Bible wasn't like the wheat we have today either. Einkorn, emmer, grains with 14 chromosomes compared to the 42 in modern wheat. A different kind of wheat with more protein, more antioxidants, and a different type of gluten that a lot of people who can't stomach today's bread can digest just fine. The bread back then was dense, dark, and slow fermented. Not the white fluffy stuff they sell now. It was a completely different food, and that matters more than you might think. If you've made it this far, it's because this is ringing a bell. Because you've lived through this too, or you're living through it right now. That feeling that something doesn't quite add up, that the old school remedies made a lot more sense than they led us to believe. Stick around, because what comes next is the part nobody's told you about: grapes, wine in moderation. The grapevine appears in Noah's very first action after the flood. Grapes contain resveratrol, anthocyanins, quercetin, compounds that scientists have been studying for 20 years for their effects on the heart and on longevity. And wine in small amounts, with meals, the way it was always meant to be drank, not the excess the good book warns about, but measured use, has real protective properties. The Good Samaritan poured oil and wine into the wounds of that man. It wasn't just a poetic image. It was medical care that actually worked. Fish. The apostles were fishermen. Jesus ate fish after he resurrected to prove he was really there. And the fish from the Sea of Galilee, sardines, anchovies, tilapia, are packed with omega-3s, DHA and EPA, the fatty acids the brain needs to function, and that the body can't make on its own. The populations that eat the most fish maintain stronger hearts, better moods, and excellent cognitive health. My Arthur, God rest his soul, came from a family of fishermen up in Maine. He made it to 90 with a mind sharper than most. Imagine that. Goat's milk. When the Bible talks about the land flowing with milk and honey, that milk wasn't the kind that comes in a plastic jug with a blue cap. It was goat's milk, fresh, with its good bacteria, with a different protein that the human gut handles way better than industrialized cow's milk, and fermented into yogurt, into fresh cheese. It was one of the most powerful probiotics people had back then. Long before anyone knew what a microbiome was, they were already feeding it right. Hyssop, number 13, the one that left me speechless. In Psalm 51 it says, "Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean." For centuries that was just seen as symbolic, until researchers analyzed hyssop and found carvacrol and thymol, the exact same compounds found in oregano and thyme, two of the most powerful natural protectors out there. They naturally cleanse and care for the body. The instructions we read in Leviticus about purification with hyssop turn out to have had a very practical purpose. God's instructions were wise. They worked. Cumin. Get this, it's the only spice Jesus mentions by name. In Matthew 23, he criticizes the Pharisees for tithing even their mint, dill, and cumin, while neglecting justice. The fact that cumin was tithed says it all. It had real value. It has a molecule, cuminaldehyde, that is highly beneficial and protective, balancing the body and improving digestion. In just 3 grams of cumin, there's almost 20% of a person's daily iron requirement. Folks who cook with cumin might not know it, but they're taking good care of themselves. Coriander. God described manna, that miraculous food in the desert, by saying it was like coriander seed. There is research suggesting that coriander helps the body feel lighter and detoxified, that it calms your nerves, that it soothes the stomach. It was in every biblical kitchen because it made people feel better after eating. And that, which might seem like a small thing, turns out to be a really big deal, though it took us long enough to figure it out. Garlic. Oh, garlic. When the Israelites had been wandering in the desert for 40 years, eating nothing but manna, they sat down and wept. And what they missed the most, it says so right in Numbers, was the garlic of Egypt. They cried over garlic. At the time, that seemed ridiculous to me. Not anymore. The allicin that forms when you crush fresh garlic does wonders to strengthen our natural defenses. It looks after your blood pressure. It helps with cholesterol. Egyptian papyruses list garlic in 20 different preparations. It made perfect sense to cry over it. And onions. They wept for onions, too, in that same list of dessert laments. Onions are one of the richest sources of quercetin, a natural soother for the body, and inulin, a fiber that directly feeds the good bacteria in the gut. Before anyone knew what the microbiome was, So the people in the Bible were eating garlic, onions, and leeks every single day. They were building the perfect intestinal ecosystem without even knowing it. Almonds. In the tabernacle, the cups of the menorah were carved like almond blossoms. Aaron, to prove he was the chosen one, brought forth a staff that blossomed overnight, an almond staff, the very first tree to wake up every spring. And almonds are some of the most nutrient-dense foods out there. In just 1 ounce, you get 37% of your daily vitamin E, magnesium, healthy fats, calcium, fiber. My neighbor Betty, who's in her 80s and strong as an ox, has a handful every morning. Just like my mother did, she tells me. You bet, Betty, just like your mother and your mother's mother. Pistachios. The patriarch Jacob, when he sent his sons to Egypt to buy grain during the famine, told them to bring gifts to impress the governor, and he put pistachios on the list. A biblical patriarch considered pistachios a gift worthy of a powerful ruler. And modern studies show that they're the nut that does the most to increase the good bacteria in your gut. They have lutein and zeaxanthin for the eyes, and potassium for blood pressure. Jacob knew what they were worth. It's just taken us a little longer to catch on. And the last one, number 20, carob, St. John's bread. Because when the gospel says that John the Baptist lived in the desert eating locusts and wild honey, plenty of scholars point out that those locusts were actually carob pods, St. John's bread, as it was called all over the Middle East. And it turns out that carob is 40% fiber, packed with compounds that protect the digestive system, tannins that settle the stomach, and minerals galore. In the old days, they used it a lot for children's upset stomachs. If John the Baptist lived for years in the desert with extraordinary health and strength, it wasn't in spite of what he ate. It was because of it. Well, look, by now you've probably understood what took me way too many years to figure out. The people who wrote those texts weren't primitive. They were observant. They paid attention to what made them feel good and what sustained them. And they built their culture, their rituals, their agriculture, and even their theology around those observations. And now science, with its clinical trials and biochemical analyses, is arriving at the exact same conclusions, one by one, food by food. The good book was right. It just didn't explain the mechanism behind it, because the mechanism wasn't the point. The food was the point. The vitality was the point. I was stubborn as a mule, thinking that newer was always better. Well, no. Sometimes the oldest things are the wisest. I'll leave it at that. What about you all? Which of these foods surprised you the most? Or is there one you already eat, and now you understand why it makes you feel so good? Drop me a line down below in the comments. I read everything you post. You know that. At 103, I've got plenty of time for it. And I like knowing I'm not the only one who forgot to look back in order to find exactly what I needed.